working at this business. I love this guy. We'll start the program. We welcome questions when we do. The questions have to be respectful. We don't mind pointed questions, but they're just going to come from a point of respect, as they always do on this talk show. J-Dubs, we can rock and roll, my friend, when you are ready. Quiet on the set. Do you want to be the president of the building next?
So I just got a text from Mr. Fenwick. He might be here at 10:45.
Perfect. It's fine. It's totally good. Guys, welcome to Real Talk with Keith Smith. It's a Friday morning in Charlottesville, Virginia. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in downtown Charlottesville, the heartbeat of this community, 8 blocks we love absolutely dearly. Today's program is presented by Yes Realty Partners and a supply chain of trusted advisors in real estate. I encourage you to go to realtalkwithkeithsmith.com and click the Partners tab. These are folks personally vetted by Keith Smith, who has 37 years of real estate experience under his belt. The talk show is on every social media platform known to mankind. Smartphones are ubiquitous, and social media is an addiction. And yes, we've exploited that for profit on the I Love CVille network. Judah Wickower, the director. Why don't we go to studio camera and welcome 2 friends of the program, 2 very distinguished gentlemen, 2 sharply dressed guys, 2 guys that have institutional memory and reputations that are sterling. Keith Smith and Lloyd Smith.
I think institutional memory means old.
I think he used the word institutional in the wrong context.
Institutional memory means seasoned and experienced.
Or institutionalized.
I think that's where he used the word institutional wrong. Lloyd, how you doing, man?
Doing great.
Good. Hey, thank you for doing this. It looks like I got an email. Mr. Fenwick will probably join us here at 10:45, I guess. So poor Judah, on top of doing all the other things he's going to do, he also has to figure out how to work in a guest live.
I think that's the easy part of what you have to do here. Yeah, Judah says yes, absolutely. Why don't we get the mayor in the mix, running for re-election? How is the campaign going, our friend?
Well, I haven't really been campaigning, certainly not the way I did 4 years ago. It's pretty clear that the turnout for this election is going to be driven by the state Senate, by the House of Delegates races. I think I've got pretty good name recognition among the folks who are going to show up. I don't know of anybody who is actively mad at me as opposed to just mad at the city or mad at government generally. So I've got a few ads running and I'll have my signs up, and other than that, I spend 40 hours a week as a lawyer, 40 hours a week as a mayor. I don't have time to campaign, frankly. So there we go.
You're doing the job, right?
Yeah.
So we sent a little pre-show email out, and I just want to kind of kick this off with one quick question. Tell everybody who's listening a little something about yourself that they don't know. I learned something about you, but go ahead and tell somebody something that nobody knows about Lloyd Snook.
Well, one thing that hopefully they will come to know in the next week is that I am a budding thespian. I am going to be playing the role of the governor of Virginia in a play that will be done up at PVCC called Can't Feel at Home. It's about the time back in the 1930s when the mountain people were being moved off the mountains to be able to make room for the Shenandoah National Park. And they decided they needed to have some local VIP play the role of the governor, and so that they picked me, and I get to play.
Or do you have other aspirations?
I do not have other aspirations.
Are you trying to release some future elected position here?
No, because if anybody gets wind of this, they're going to say no way for this fellow, because I'm playing the role of Governor George Peary, whom nobody's ever heard of, but he was governor of Virginia 1934 to 1938. And I have the next to the last scene in the play where I basically tell the sheriff of Rockingham County, you go evict those people, you burn their houses down, you are an agent of the law.
Okay, well, time out. We're trying, it's election season, we do not want.
I think folks may not also know this. Ray Cadell highlights this all the time. Our mayor has the voice of a songbird as well.
Not today, I don't.
He's a dynamic man. He's a thespian. He's a vocal standout. He's a hell of a leader, a talented esquire, a good guy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mayor Snook, what are some of the key points or the key topic matters you're hearing from constituents that they may want you to keep a close eye on? Upzoning seems to be front and center.
Upzoning is certainly one of them, but I've been surprised when I've gone to neighborhood associations and so on that the very few, unless you're going to a place where like the president of the neighborhood association has taken a very active role, they're more interested in what are you going to do about the violent crime problem. There are a few other issues like that, or I get a fair number of questions about the proposal to put a bunch, 200 and plus apartments at the end of High Street, right up against the Rivanna River. Those are the kinds of things that we're getting a lot of conversation about, but upzoning is certainly one of them.
Neil Williamson watching the program, he's got a little joke for the mayor over here. Important to note, the state of Virginia kicked the mountain folks off their land, and then they gave it to the federal government.
That's right.
We have Johnny Ornalis, the owner of El Mariachi, watching the program. Bill McChesney, the mayor of McIntyre, I believe, a classmate of yours at one time?
Classmate of mine, that's right.
Memory serves correct. Bill McChesney, hello. Gun violence, I'll be straightforward here with you. My wife has mentioned to me multiple times on girls' nights, like say a Thursday evening, she leaves me with the boys, she gets some time to herself. And I say, are you going to go downtown, Zocalo, for a cocktail or drink? She's mentioned to me that me and my girlfriends right now don't feel safe going as a girl pack to Charlottesville downtown at night. She said that to us multiple times. Point of concern, you and I both bleed the downtown mall. We love the downtown mall. I do believe Chief Kachis is turning the ship around, the proverbial ship. But I want to throw that to you and let you go anywhere you want to go.
Well, okay, first of all, let's talk about reality and perception, and to the extent, frankly, to which perception becomes reality. The reality is that violent crime in Charlottesville, as violent crime nationally, has been on the decline for 20 years. But it ticked up again in 2020, 21, 2022. And so the reality, and it's been a steep decline and a relatively short incline, but that doesn't change the perception that things are getting worse, and they are a little bit. But the interesting problem is to try to balance the perception and the reality. The number of violent crimes, the number of shootings, generally down, up the last couple of years. Now, what can we do about it? The first thing we have to do about it is to understand the problem. There are basically, I've said there are basically three things that are behind most of the shootings. Either we get a domestic violence situation, which frankly policing doesn't solve. Some social programs can help with that, some court programs can help with that, but it's not really something the council can have much to do about. The second is adult crime, which an awful lot of which is generated from one of two things: either specifically a drug deal gone bad, something like that, or a private beef. The Buck Squad folks have been working on this private beef thing, trying to find out where the private beefs are, to calm things down, to mediate some things, and that's been effective to some extent. And as far as the drug thing goes, I want to point out a couple things. One is that the number of those kinds of crimes still is lower than it used to be, number one. Number two, that we've got suspects and arrests made in all of these crimes. So whereas a year ago there was a concern that we weren't getting the cooperation from the citizenry, now we're getting cooperation from the citizens. Now we're getting people telling us stuff. Now, and that comes from reestablishing a connection between the police department and the folks on the street. So that's starting to work. That's something that Michael Kachis was really big on when he got started, and he's been working on that, and it's helping. So then the third piece is the juvenile shootings. And the only good thing I can say about that is that at least those shootings haven't resulted in any deaths, and they haven't maybe a few injuries, but that's about it. Because frankly, most of them are lousy shots.
The juvenile shooting he's referencing, Omni Hotel parking lot. Mm-hmm. We've dubbed it the 2023 version of the OK Corral here in Charlottesville. And you're right, the perception is a bit sketchy. There was a murder outside a bar in the downtown mall.
Right.
Some kids coming home from school in the 10th and Page neighborhood with a crossing guard right in attendance. May or may not have witnessed a truck that had someone die in it with the drug deal that's gone bad. And to your point, maybe the crime is staying steady from a statistical standpoint, but the counterpoint is the crime has become a little bit more prevalent in high commerce areas or touristy areas, and that's impacted the perception.
Yeah, and it has. But if we look at where the crimes, and let me just finish up one thought, and that's the question of juvenile crime. Council is very concerned about that because that may be one thing we can do something about. When we're looking at kids who complain they've got nothing else to do, but they hang around and just sort of hang around and get in trouble.
Loiter.
So if that means youth sports, if that means making sure that kids can get into Washington Park pool to swim and so on, if that means various other youth programs, theater arts programs, music programs, all kinds of things that we had gotten away from in recent years, and we need to bring some of those back. I would love it, for example, as I speak now as a former Boy Scout leader, I would love it if we could reestablish the Boy Scout troops in some of the churches, for example. That kind of thing might help a great deal. So council is interested in trying to find youth programs that will provide constructive alternatives. The real problem overall, and this is not just in Charlottesville, but it's a national problem, has been that increasingly people have tended to think of it's normal to solve a problem with a gun. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I think the perception was that was a pretty unusual thing. But now it seems a lot of folks are carrying guns, and sometimes they're carrying guns because they're afraid that somebody else is carrying a gun. And we get shootings in ways and for reasons that would never have resulted 10 or 20 years ago. I don't know how we solve that problem, but I think there are a few things we can work on, and we're trying to work on those. Now, as far as the downtown mall in particular, one of the things that has been the casualty of the great resignation, so to speak, the loss of 30-plus police officers, has been that we haven't been able to have a constant patrol presence on the downtown mall, until 1 or 2 in the morning. And I'm hoping that we're going to be getting, I think we figure 6 or 7 new officers as of July 1, just recent graduates from the police academy.
Awesome.
That will be a good step. We were hoping to put another 6 or 7 into the police academy to come out 4 or 5 months later fully ready to go. So we're working on that. Michael Kachis has been doing a good job of that recruiting. And to his credit, Tito Durrett did a good job on that kind of recruiting as well, because the people who are now coming out of the academy largely were people who were recruited during Tito's term.
Who's the assistant police chief under Michael Kachis, Tito Durrett. Right. He's a heck of a guy as well.
Yeah.
So
he was also retiring, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
When did he make that announcement?
I don't know that he's formally made the announcement, but there will be
end of this year?
At the end of this month.
Tito Durrett, oh my goodness. When I see you, sir, and I see him often, he's a very recognizable guy, broad-shouldered guy. I will say congratulations for your retirement and thank you for your service. This man became a man in the Charlottesville Police Department. I believe he started as a junior police officer, went all the way up the ranks, was the interim police chief, and is now Kachis' right-hand man until the end of the month. I think Mayor Snook just broke some news right there.
I wasn't intending
Yeah.
to. I thought it was known.
I follow all this
Yeah.
stuff as closely as you. I did not, well, not as closely as you, because you have much
You're the
more
mayor.
intel than I do. You're the mayor. Yeah.
In case you were wondering.
He's the mayor.
He's the mayor, just in case you were wondering. With bells, by the way, but we'll leave that as an insight.
We like the mayor, can you tell?
So, look, I could talk a little bit about the youth end of it. You know, as a product of the 60s and the 70s in New York City, this is very similar type of scenario. And, you know, the local police officer, the beat officer that we used to walk the neighborhood, used to be the point to grab the kids, or not necessarily grab them, but educate them and say, look, hey, here's a YMCA, here's some. So, the part of the problem is you're short 30 police officers, right?
Yeah.
And that's something else you guys can fix.
Which, by the way, is about 25% of our approved number.
So that's a huge number.
It's a huge-
And currently, and I just met this gentleman, currently the beat officer for the downtown mall, the longstanding beat officer has retired. Very kind guy, knew everyone on the beat, kind of looked like Super Mario of Mario Brothers. I miss him. The replacement is also a kind gentleman, a little long in the tooth, if you may, 68 years old. I'm not saying he's old.
Is he back on this whole
But
institutional?
Still young.
But gentlemen, this man is pedaling and pushing a bike and
Yeah.
walking up and down the downtown mall for
You know
10
what?
hours.
Good for
you
him.
gentlemen sit in chairs and fight the battles with pens and notepads.
Should I show him a picture of me on my bike? Maybe he can go ahead and do that. But what we're talking about is the real solving of, in my opinion, of the issue is the direct contact between the police officers and the community, and community engagement on that. And that's something the city does control. I mean, you can't control the hiring of it, but you can surely control the budgetary side of it. So there's enough money to make it attractive for a police officer or somebody wanting to get into this line of work. But I'll tell you, as a kid that grew up in there, it worked. I mean, the police officers knew your first name, knew who you were, knew where you lived.
And knew where you were supposed to be.
Knew where you were supposed to be. And as a kid growing up, what you wanted to happen as a police officer, if you were doing something you shouldn't have done, not that I've ever done that.
Of course not. The statute of limitations is expired. Don't worry about it.
And if you
Yeah,
have
I'm not so sure about that.
And Keith, if you had done something that you're not supposed to do, I know a pretty good lawyer that might be able to help you out of there.
But the fear was that they told your parents, right? So I'd rather, whatever you needed to do, Mr. Police Officer, you did it, and that was that. But the point was there was programs. They took you to the YMCA. Gangs were very prevalent back in those days, and you had to walk different streets to get to school because
Right.
you didn't walk that street because it belonged to that gang, and all these different things. But in any event, excuse me, I forgot to shut off my hearing aids. That's something that the city can definitely do, and the city council can do.
But it comes down to getting back to community policing.
There you go.
We used to have a community policing program. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we got away from community policing. There were some active, noisy voices saying we want less police presence in our communities. And so there was less police presence. The more recent view is, no, we want police presence in our communities. We just want the police presence to be done right.
To be fair.
Well, but what
to be
that does,
equitable.
it builds trust that the kids
Yeah.
can then communicate. I mean, does anybody know what stickball is here?
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
stickball.
Yeah. So
he's
we
a baseball fan.
We used to
Mayor
play
Stone.
stickball in the middle of the street, and the cop would pitch for us,
Uh-huh.
right? And that was that. And the firemen would, but everybody was community oriented. Everybody lived in the community, which brings us to a housing conversation. That's also part of the problem. Part of the problem is, as you know, I chair the land trust. We have a new police officer that we're trying to help to buy a home to live in the city, and we just can't get it to happen.
Yeah.
Right? There's not enough product. There's only one single family attached townhome available to buy. It's a little bit outside of the price point. We're trying to work on some subsidies and all this kind of great stuff. So where the city can help, not that I'm making a pitch for the land trust, but I may just do that, is
It wouldn't be the first time.
Get out of town. Lloyd Snook is going to hear from a nonprofit asking for money? Get out of town.
I think he's referring to me.
Oh, I know, but I am also referring to the many nonprofits that ask Lloyd Snook and Charlottesville government for money.
But that, God love it, Charlottesville is like the nonprofit capital of the world.
We have more nonprofits per capita in Charlottesville than any other place in the state.
Is that true?
It's
that
absolutely true.
That's a true stat.
And what happens is every time somebody in Charlottesville gets a brainy idea, they say, I'm going to go start a nonprofit.
That's so
and
true.
what I keep trying to tell people is, why don't you get together with any of the 10 other nonprofits already trying to work in the same space? And if you pool your resources, maybe you will have between you enough money to have a really solid executive director, to have a really solid finance person. Where these organizations founder is, they're too small to have the overhead necessary to grow.
So,
That's good advice.
Mr. Mayor, we are thinking a lot alike. That's the reason why there was a merger between the Land Trust and PHA, and there's other nonprofits in the housing space that we're trying to bring under the envelope.
And PHA itself, Piedmont Housing Alliance,
Thank you.
was an alliance of about 3 organizations about 40 years ago that finally had that same realization at the same time.
So I'm bringing just regular business thinking to it. It's okay. We're much stronger together than we are apart. So you'll be seeing us knocking on the door. But back to the policing thing and helping people stay here is that there has to be a larger pool of subsidy so that we can get this police officer, this young police officer, to actually live in the community that he's policing. It's going to be a female that she is policing on that, so they know each other. People start developing.
That's legitimately an issue. Like, we have a lot of the officers on the police force listen to the show because we're very, very, very pro-police in this town, on this network.
Sure.
And it's tough to be pro-police in this network because there's a very small, organized minority on Twitter that attacks people like me that say, I back the blue. So the blue listens to the show because we support them, and they say if you can get the word out to the community, we could get more people working here if we could afford to live within the community. Albemarle County and some of the other jurisdictions in Central Virginia are offering perhaps the same compensation, in some cases more, and those are jurisdictions that are much more pro-blue, and the guys and gals can afford to live within those communities. So the scales of justice. Do I commute 30 minutes to a job where the folks may not like me, or do I just stay where I currently live and have better quality of life, save the money on the commute, and make more money where I live?
So those who watch the show know I come from a service family, right? My father, grandfather, great-grandfather, all New York City firemen. The neighborhood I grew in, the building I grew up in, your dad was either a cop or a fireman. That was just the neighborhood that you grew in. And so I'm personally always pro cop, firemen, sanitation, all these folks that serve us, but it goes back to, what AMI, area median income right now is 110, right? 110,000. 80% of that is somewhere in the 88, thank you, 88 percentile. So, that is almost impossible to buy an affordable residential unit. I know this, again, as being a land trust chair. In order to hit that 88%, the maximum sales price cannot exceed, in today's environment, about $215,000, $225,000, right? So we've got literally nothing that's available for purchase in the city of Charlottesville that meets that criteria. So there has to be subsidy that's brought in to help lower that number down. So, hey, zoning rewrite, upzoning, whatever you want to call it. I bet my mustache on it. I'm pretty sure
you won the bet.
I won the bet.
Yeah.
It's funny. I won the bet.
Neil's watching.
I know. I was trying to invite.
So is the Daily Progress.
I tried to invite Neil to come on the show on Wednesday to talk about the results of the election. I didn't say this, but what I was really saying, why don't you bring a bottle of bourbon because you owe me one? For those who don't know, I bet my mustache with Neil that on the 19th, which is Monday, that the city council would adopt the new zoning rewrite, which is clearly not going to happen.
I want to throw something to the mayor here. And a lot of stakeholders have mentioned this to me. I've also perhaps noticed it with some of the body language or some of the things you've said. Are you cooling a little bit on upzoning in its full magnitude?
Well, cooling is probably the wrong way to put it. Let me say this, I am cooler than some.
Okay.
I have always been cooler than some. And I think to understand kind of where I'm coming from, we have to understand that the upzoning proposals have basically three pieces.
Yep.
The first piece is what I think is the most comprehensive change and the one that is going to be the most important, and the one that I am actually in favor of. It says on every residential lot you can have up to 3 dwelling units. That automatically triples the number of possible units. It automatically increases substantially the number of units that can be built. It means that a house could be turned into a duplex or a triplex simply by doing interior changes. And what we've seen historically in places like Walla Walla, Washington, if you want to go smaller than Charlottesville, or Minneapolis, if you want to go larger than Charlottesville, what we've historically seen is a lot of duplex conversions.
Yeah.
Well, those duplex conversions turn into the single-family attached units that are so rare in Charlottesville right now. So this is what we call the missing middle. The kinds of things that in between the single family and the 20-unit apartment complex, whether that means a duplex or a quadplex, whether it means some townhouses, or basically the idea is you can get a building that looks kind of like a house, maybe up to 4,000 square feet. And from the city perspective, do we really care whether you've got 4 1,000 square foot apartments in there, or whether you've got one 4,000 person in a substantially larger house? We do to some extent. We've got to be a little bit aware of parking requirements and things like that.
And infrastructure strains.
Yeah, but infrastructure really is not that big a problem. And people think about infrastructure. I would look primarily at streets rather than, for example, we have the water supply. We really do. Trust me, we've got the water supply.
Okay.
The sewer capacity, same issue. But the streets streets will always be a problem. So that's the first thing is this change. And I think that all by itself would be a major change in the right direction. And it would allow this missing middle construction. That's not going to build many affordable units if we're using the Keith Smith articulation of the concept, where affordable units refers to people who have to have subsidies to make it work, where they're looking at 60% of AMI or less. It would help deal more with the housing affordability portion, which is this general notion of we need more supply of the people, of the places where people who want to be 80, 100% AMI, even they can't find a place to buy right now. So that would take some of the pressure off and would make a lot of places more affordable. Now, that's all my first piece of the three pieces of the whole zoning, the upzoning proposal. And by the way, hi, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
Bob Fenwick's in the house. We're at the studio camera here. Hello, Bob.
Sorry I'm late, but it's hard to find a parking spot around here, Lloyd.
Parking
Could
is a
that be
tough.
Funny you should talk about that. We were just talking about parking.
About the density? Is that what we're
We're talking about parking in residential neighborhoods.
We
But anyway.
talked about maybe Mayor Snook cooling a smidge on upzoning. He highlighted that of the council currently, he's been the coolest, and by coolest, maybe that's not the right word, maybe concerned, maybe wanting to take a serious look. This gentleman, Bob Fenwick, is running very much on a platform and campaign. He's a one-term councilor. He's running for re-election, or he's running for another term. It would not be re-election, but he's running for another term. Your platform very much is concerned, and let's pump the brakes on upzoning in the city of Charlottesville.
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
All right. Well, Lloyd, did you finish what you were saying about the...
No.
Oh, okay.
But it's okay.
Well, let me
Jump in.
These situations, you got to have time to finish an answer. So I'll be glad to start talking now, but I'm interested in what Lloyd says. You're right, he is.
Well, let's hit the reset button a little bit. So why don't we kick it off real quick? Tell us who you are, why you're running, and then we'll jump back into the upzoning thing. So tell us a little bit about
Okay.
yourself for those who don't know you.
Which one?
Why-
All of these cameras?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
He's
yeah.
rotating all these cameras.
All you got to do is look in a mic
You
and
got
talk.
the Daily Progress, NBC 29, and the weekly newspaper on.
Okay,
Just got to
great.
figure out what your good side is,
Yeah.
Bob.
They're all good, Bob.
Yeah,
They're all good.
Okay, I'm Bob Fenwick. I was on council from, I think, 2014 through 2017. And August 12th happened, or September 12th.
August.
September, was it August? And it really changed the city. And after that, it was the pandemic. So we've been in sort of a real mess for 5 or 6 years, and we're just now starting to come out of it. So I had a family situation that I had to take care of, but people would always text me and email me and say, Bobby, can you do anything about this? We got a zoning situation here where the citizens are not being listened to. There really is no public involvement in this proposal and how to put it together. I didn't have time probably 2 or 3 years ago, but that's basically what I've heard for 2 or 3 years, and that was possibly the reason why I jumped into the race. I was waiting for somebody that would be strong enough to present an alternative or to give a good critique of what the city was about to do, and when I really didn't see that happening, I decided to jump in again.
Your platform seems to be pretty straightforward. You're very concerned about taxes and the direction we're heading with taxes on citizens, to the point that maybe the community is getting gentrified. It's certainly the priority on taxes on rooftops, people's houses, and your platform is pretty much against upzoning. I think we're going to see with you, Mr. Fenwick, and I respect anyone who's willing to put themselves in the public eye to run for a government spot, because it ain't about the money. I think this man's getting 20 for the mayor. I think somewhere 18 to 19
yeah.
For a councilor.
So let me jump in
Please.
real quick. So
Please.
as you talk,
Yeah, please.
So I'm not against upzoning. I made my career in real estate. I'm a general contractor.
Right.
So closings are a very important part of my business. I understand about the age of the city and how it needs to be refreshed. So I'm not against upzoning, but I'm very much for the citizens being involved in how that upzoning occurs. And that's what I just said. Basically, the citizens didn't feel like they were being taken seriously, to the point that one of the members of the Planning Commission called for a boycott of a small business.
That's Rory Stolzenberg. He's watching the show right now.
Yeah, merely because.
Which actually had nothing to do with the upzoning proposal, let's be clear.
Well, no, but I introed that by saying that people were not being listened to, so that kind of thing. I didn't think that was the way to go. This has been going on across the board, really, with city issues. The people don't think they're being listened to. Well, when they say that, when they complain and they say, look, you're not listening to me, whoever they're talking to says, we are listening to you. But what that person is saying never seems to make it into the conversation where the proposal is being presented or critiqued or whatever it is. So if it were up to me, I would stop the upzoning proposal as it sits on the table now.
Wow.
This afternoon.
Wow.
The developers don't really need the breaks that they're going to get in the current proposal. For the last 10 years, they've had basically almost everything they've wanted. And in most cases, it's worked out pretty good for them. And if anybody takes issue with that, if you were to start at Beer Run and walk your way or ride your way up almost to the rotunda, you'll see building after building, even some of the side streets like Riverwalk. So we're doing pretty good, but what has accompanied that is really a lack of what some people call affordable housing. Now that's really aside, that's kind of a peripheral thing, but all of these issues that we're going to talk about and that we have talked about through this campaign so far are tied together, almost all of them, in one way or the other. The zoning, public participation, the budget, whatever you want to bring up. So, does that?
No, I think that was a great answer. I'd love to get Mayor Snook's take on this. And before I throw, offer that opportunity, I think we're truly going to get a temperature of the city of Charlottesville on Tuesday evening, Wednesday morning, based on this barometer right here. I think this is a bellwether of the city of Charlottesville, Bob Fenwick and his campaign.
Yeah, Tuesday's going to be a really interesting. I'm looking forward to our show on Wednesday.
Yeah,
by the way.
this man, if you get on council, and I think you have a chance, man. And I think your campaign of what you're saying with the taxes and the upzoning, and let's listen to the constituents, is going to resonate with a hell of a lot of people, especially in an off year. Yeah. I think we're really going to see what's going to happen here. Mayor Snook, anywhere you want to go?
Well, Lloyd, real quick, look, if I'm successful, I'll be one of 5.
I totally get that.
I think Lloyd will be another one of 5. So
I think this man's going to be on. I think Michael Payne's got a pretty good shot because the incumbent has tremendous name recognition, and Payne and Snook are incumbents.
It's all about that third seat.
This third seat is up for grabs. I think Mr. Cooper may have put himself in a tough spot with the fundraising and the ChatGPT issue that's out there now. I think it's between him and Natalie.
So I do want to get this out. I invited everybody to show up today. So thank you for showing up. The Michael couldn't make it today because he had a business meeting in Richmond, but the other 2 chose not to join us, which was a little
odd. Curious. I'll leave it at that.
I thought it was a great opportunity for
Mayor Snook is itching to say something.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say I haven't talked to anybody else, but both Natalie and Deshad actually have jobs.
Sure. You have a job.
I do too, but I also
You're self-employed.
I think he was digging. I think that dig was maybe towards me, right?
But so let me just a couple of thoughts on what Bob had said. First of all, when I've been hearing these complaints about there's no opportunity for public involvement for 2 years, and I can tell you after literally thousands of emails and at least 20 meetings, public meetings, most of them broadcast, most of them, certainly well attended. I would venture a guess that we have heard from probably 2,000 or 3,000 people. Now, in all honesty, many of the people who are writing to us most passionately are actually county residents, and I'm not quite sure how I'm supposed to deal with that. But I have the ability, when I get an email from somebody, I can look them up and I can see where they live, and when they make an impassioned plea for what the city ought to be doing, and I'm thinking, why aren't you making the same impassioned plea to the County Board of Supervisors?
Well, because they've already limited the county to only 5% development.
I understand.
Yeah, but here, I'll jump in and add to that. And I've been preaching this or saying this for 503 shows that we're doing today. We're all interconnected.
Yeah.
What you guys do on council affects Albemarle County, affects my home county of Fluvanna, and vice versa. That's why this housing conversation, in my opinion, is so important. But I'll let you respond a little more to Bob.
Anyway,
Mr. Fenwick.
So what I really want to do is get back and finish my answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was saying that there are 3 pieces to the upzoning proposal. The first is the 3 units per lot. I'm in favor of that. Historically, what we've seen is that it will result in slow but nonetheless significant increase in number of units. It's not going to all by itself cause huge changes in neighborhoods, and it will result, when it results, it would be resulting in changes that would look like other houses in the neighborhood. It wouldn't be a 20-unit apartment complex, for example. The second change that's being proposed is a breakdown between RA, RB, and RC lots, where an RA lot could take up to 3 or 4 units, an RB lot could take up to 6 units, an RC lot could take up to 8 units. I'm not convinced that we need to have that degree of intensity. I think that and I certainly don't think we should have an entire street of that. So what I've suggested is that we figure out some way, if we've got RA everywhere with up to 3 lots, up to 3 units permissible, that we have some way of, perhaps on corner lots, some way of rationing it so that we don't have every single lot going to be developed to the point of 8 units per lot. And so I would scale back on that. The third piece is for some so-called double density bonus for an all affordable complex. It would say if you have the right to build 4 units, we'll let you build 8 units provided that they are all affordable to people making less than 60% AMI. The problem is that in order to do that, and I've worked out the numbers with sort of a pro forma that I've run by some people who know a lot more about this stuff than I do, everybody agrees that those units will never be built.
The subsidy is too high.
You're going to need like $1 million a lot subsidy to make that happen.
And I know this world well. You're going to need, like I said, to hit 80% AMI, because Bob, I chair the Piedmont Community Land Trust, so I understand what this is required. You can't exceed a sale price of $215, $225, call it $215. It's going to cost you $400,000 just to produce a unit.
Yeah.
So the subsidy is around minimum $200,000. So you're 100% right. It's probably not going to happen unless there's a ton of tax incentives, a ton of connection fees waived, all this stuff. And as you know, I'm working on the Albemarle County developer incentive. I'm running that group, which I want to invite everybody to show up publicly. But those are the math on that is pretty large undertaking.
Yeah.
To get to that.
So what I've suggested is let's just take that off the table. First of all, the folks on the left are extremely excited about it, even though it will never be built. And the folks on the right are extremely upset about it, even though it will never be built. And so let's take some of the political heat out of this equation, take that out of the formulation of the plan, and let's look at what is really likely to get built. And what I would like to see with the 3 units per lot and some degree of higher intensity but rationed in some way, best odds from what I've been able to gather. We'll see more of this in about a month when a new economic analysis is expected to come out. The best view of that is that it would result in perhaps 300 or 400 units a year, but no more.
So, Bob, I'll let you jump in here for a minute, but I've
There's
been
a lot of people watching you guys here.
I've been saying this for a long time. It is not going to result in a large number of units. I'm on a national cohort. I look at this all throughout the country, small cities, large cities. The single-family detached turning into a duplex, that's the path that's going to happen.
Because that's the path of least resistance.
It's a passive least resistance.
And most affordable remodeling costs.
So, correct. Where the city can help on that to try to, and Bob, I prefer the term housing affordability over affordable housing. Affordable housing means different things to different folks on that end of it. What has worked in these smaller cities that I was part of is these incentives, tax incentives, connection incentives to say, hey, look, if you do this to 80% AMI, 60% AMI, and you rent it out, there's a 15-year moratorium on taxes or whatever it is. That's what's helping the affordability portion of it. If you don't have that component in it, they'll go Airbnb, right? They'll go, market
Richmond
rate.
City just made Airbnbs completely legal. They said normally the requirement, this was earlier this year, was you had to live 180 days in the residence to legitimately Airbnb it. And then Richmond City said, why don't we just make Airbnbs completely legal with no requirements? Then we get the tax revenue from the property itself and the lodging revenue on top of it. And we complement the region by driving more tourists and giving them a place to stay. Very unique approach.
Tuesday, we closed our daughter's and son-in-law's house in Richmond. If you don't think that was part of the plan.
Very unique. I think the Richmond idea is pretty damn good.
They've got a garage that we're going to be converting into an Airbnb because they paid
Astronomical
amount of money for a starter home, and they have to offset their thing in there. But Bob's taking some notes. Why don't you jump in, Bob?
And Bob, you got a lot of people asking you questions right here.
Oh, I'm sure,
Okay.
yeah. Well, Keith, let me just first say, affordable housing affordability. After we leave this building today, and this should really be going out to the audience, they still won't know what the difference is. It's like a difference without a meaning. So that's one of the issues that
That's
people...
fair.
They're trying to get their input in, so it makes a difference.
Yeah, so when you say
And
the
right
word,
from the beginning, that's what it is.
so this is live, by the way.
Oh yeah, but let me finish
Yeah,
that
go
up,
ahead.
because you're a professional. I know what you've been doing for a long time. It's like a doctor going into a doctor's office, and the doctor's talking one language and the patient is talking
amen.
another. So that's what it is. But go
Well,
ahead.
that's why we created the Regional Housing Partnership, because everybody in these four pillars weren't talking to each other. But you're 100% right. A dear friend of mine,
Robert Liberty?
No, well, that's a different thing. I was talking about our dear friend, Mr. Fairchild, right?
Did you see that post from Chris Fairchild, the Fluvanna County Board of Supervisor?
Nope.
He did a post on social media that basically said, if you want to come to Fluvanna and change Fluvanna, don't move to Fluvanna.
Yeah.
That's literally what he said. And he also said in that post, he will never, as long as he's an elected official, approve more development and density in Fluvanna.
Yeah.
Straight up said that.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? This is authentic. At least we know where the man
You know
stands.
what?
That's all we want from our electeds, is we want to know where they stand.
So
And
Chris
if
is
they
a-
represent, it sounds like he's representing.
Fluvanna.
Well,
Yeah.
Chris, I would disagree with that, but Chris is a dear friend of mine of 30 some odd years. I know him well. Our children grew up together. I love him dearly and respect everything, but we differ on our opinion on that. And I'll tell you why. Just before you came in, we were having a conversation about policing, right? And we're 30 cops short, right? Well, part of the problem also is I'm trying to find a home for a newly police officer that wants to live in the city of Charlottesville but can't. Right? There's literally only one duplex for sale right now, and that's at 257. And this individual can't go over 215 because of the amount of money that they make, and there's not enough subsidy to come in and do the difference. So where I think housing affordability or having the people who serve us, Bob, the best, police officers, firemen, teachers, nurses, this concept of single-family detached turning into duplexes, there are some paths there that we can say, if you're a police officer, you get whatever, some sort of extra money from a fund of some sort. But we need to keep these folks who serve us close to where they're serving us. Otherwise, to Jerry's point, they're going to go to some other county, make the same amount of money,
And not have to commute.
and not have to commute.
Yeah, well, let me tell you real quick. My wife and I moved down here when she went to law school.
I remember this story.
We couldn't find anything in Charlottesville that we could afford. The rent was too high. I just started my business. She had just started law school. It took us probably 3 years to save up, and even then we had help from her mother. And I built a Lowe's house, a small house, out in Earlysville. And that was almost 40 minutes drive in, 40 minutes drive out. And after a while, that got burdensome, and one of my children needed medical care. So we knew what the city offered. Vibrancy, it offered hospitals fairly close, churches, libraries, a downtown, all of that stuff. So I was in construction, and I found a house close to here that was abandoned. And we got it for $69,000.
Good for you.
So that was probably 40 years ago, something like that. And that was the only way we could move into the city because of the cost. So this affordable housing affordability, whatever you want to call it, has been with us for as long as I've been in Charlottesville.
It's just the numbers.
It's a good thing, and there's a bad
But
thing.
here's the difference, Bob. You're 100% right. Came here in 1986, got out of the Marine Corps in 86, came here in 87. Jerry and I talk about this all the time. My first house, it was 18% interest on a $150,000, $125,000 house. So somebody does the math. That was a lot of money in 1988. But we've had such a spike in value since 2015. Single-family detached, no new construction. 2015, the median sales price was $275. Today, year to date, it's $495. That's a $220K increase. 80%. The cost to buy a home in 8 years, single-family detached, right? I'm not talking about attached on it. In 8 years, jumped up 80.
That's the car footprint, right?
No,
Or is that
this
city of Charlottesville
city.
only? Okay,
this
city
is,
only.
This is a city
Absolutely.
program. I've worked on city numbers.
Nicely done.
So it's 275 8 years ago, 2015, 495 today, That's it. Unless I've done my math wrong, that's $220,000 difference. I believe that relates out to about 80%. If
There's
did
no question
my
that I
math
think
right.
upzoning has impacted those values because the land and the dirt is much more opportunistic now, and you have speculators seeing that opportunity and willing to pay higher the assessment or market value for that opportunity. I have a very pointed question that I have to ask of candidate Bob Fenwick. I think this is a very fair question, sir. But it is a pointed question. You referenced the house in the city of Charlottesville. That house is on the market for sale now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Can you give us some insight there? If you're running for city council, you got to live within city limits.
Yeah, we wouldn't, well.
You wouldn't move.
It's just me now, so
Oh.
no, we wouldn't move.
Okay.
And there'd be no stairs.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, understood.
The kind
You'll
of thing.
find out when you get to a certain age.
I had to ask the man.
What
That's
did
a
you
fair
say?
question.
Institutional?
Yeah,
when we get to an institutional age?
That's what I tell the real.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're saying you're looking for a house in the city that may fit what's ahead.
I'm sorry, it may fit what?
What's ahead for you from the next 15, 20 years of your life? That's why you're considering moving. Is
So
that what
the
you're saying?
term is you're looking for something to age in place. That's
Yeah,
the-
well,
Understood.
yeah, and that's what we do when we talk to a realtor. I got to be close to a hospital. I want to be close to a church.
That's
I
fair.
want to be close to,
Rory Stolzenberg
Yeah.
put on Twitter, asked me to ask you that question.
yeah.
Literally, just Rory Stolzenberg, the planning commissioner, said, ask Bob this question.
So, hey,
Okay.
Bob,
And but real quick.
I happen to be a real estate agent, and I happen to be in the MLS right now.
Okay.
It's a beautiful home, Bob.
Oh, yeah. it
Yeah,
is.
you've done a hell of a lot.
No,
Oh,
we're
yeah,
not.
yeah.
So there are only 2 homes available currently right now, because what we're talking about is a primary suite on the main level, right? This side of the table.
I think he's trying to close a deal here.
I'm trying to
Russ.
close
I know.
I'm
I think he's trying to close.
He didn't know. I actually do this for a living. There's only, but I want to make a point. There's only 2 for sale. One is $650,000 in Fry Springs, and the other one is $814,000 in Lachlan Hill.
Yeah,
That's going to be a tough find for you, my friend.
yeah.
It's going to be a tough find.
Well, I mean, I can get one. I can get a fixer-upper. I wouldn't want to. And Keith, we both know that real estate is cyclical. You got boom times and you got bad times.
You also.
I
We have to
would-
get Mayor Sook in the mix because he's got something to say. But candidate Fenwick is also. You said you paid $69,000 for this house.
Yes.
May I say what it's listed to current?
Well, it's public knowledge.
record.
Yeah, it's public.
Okay, I'm not trying to put you in a tough
Oh,
spot.
no,
I
it's
feel like
public.
I'm being fair here and doing my job. That's what I'm. $1,450,000.
Yeah.
The asking price. I would imagine with $69,000 that you purchased for and the $1,450,000 asking price.
yeah,
that's
but
a
in
nice
fairness-
chunk of money.
In fairness, I bet you refinanced that a couple of times.
Well, there's a little refinancing in
Yeah.
there, and it's a business. It's a zone.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to try to.
So let's get Lloyd to jump in the conversation. Anything you want to add to this?
Well, on the most recent question, no.
There you go.
Well, how about this question for both the gentlemen? The community wants affordability with housing. And whether you're on the left or the right, a libertarian, a socialist, a Republican, or Democrat, we want affordability with housing. Everybody does. Please explain this to me. Very fair question. How can we seriously consider buying 23 acres from Wendell Wood on the Rivanna River that's going to kibosh 200 plus units of apartments when the whole concept is supply and demand? You add more supply to the ecosystem, prices will stabilize. That's the essence of upzoning. More supply, stabilizing pricing. Yet community outcry with a small portion of people on High Street is demanding that Mayor Snook and potentially you, if you're on council in the dais, buy this land from the largest property owner in Central Virginia at a premium and convert it into a park. From my perspective, and it's the perspective of a businessman, that seems hypocritical to me.
Well, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Okay?
Environmental concerns and housing concerns can both be advanced. Occasionally, there will be trade-offs. This is a situation, I mean, what I have said is to the people on East High Street, and to be fair, it's not to the people living on East High Street, because there aren't any people living on East High Street. They're living
Around.
on the neighborhood streets,
Yeah.
Fairway and so on, Caroline, that if we're going to stop this, we need to be willing to buy it. because we can't simply say to somebody, there's a perfectly legal use there, we're just not going to let you do it. And so...
Because it's by right.
That'll end up...
Well, it's sort of by right. There are some really interesting complications to it. They've now advanced 4 different proposals trying to figure out how they can legally get access to the property. And
This is Shimp?
well, Justin Shimp is involved with it.
He's just
Yes,
the- he's just the
Wendell
engineer.
Wood is the owner.
And then
But
Bo Carrington is in the middle.
they would be, I gather, the folks who would be buying it to do all of the work.
That's
Wendell Wood typically doesn't do the development himself. He holds it until he sells it to a developer.
There you go.
And so the developer is coming up with these proposals, one after another, after another, after another. The first proposal was clearly illegal under Virginia law. The second proposal, I don't know all of the details, but the final the proposal that they've made most recently is a way to technically comply with the law. The problem that I've got with it is that it doesn't really comply with our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan does not envision multifamily residential over there. The current zoning permits it only because most of it was zoned for business use, basically because it was the only use that was permissible to allow the circus that would come there
that's right.
every
Yeah,
year.
that's right.
And they didn't, when it was last rezoned umpteen years ago, that was sort of the thought that
Yeah.
people had in mind. But I don't think anybody seriously contemplated at the time that you would be crazy enough to be putting
In a
200 plus
floodplain?
units in the floodplain.
Forget about the traffic impacts there.
Yeah, the traffic's another problem, but unfortunately, the way things work is that the traffic impacts are things that a developer gets to stick the city with, whereas building in a floodplain is their problem, and we've got to figure out, again, consistent with our comprehensive plan, is this a use that is consistent with the comprehensive plan or not? And a couple of things have been pointed out to me fairly recently about ways that city council can say to the developer, city council can say to the planning commission, this is talking about extending public works, about extending a street that they want us to accept as a street. And as such, you, Planning Commission, need to certify to us that this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And if you can't, maybe the deal can't go forward. So, I mean, I get back to the point that ultimately, in fairness, if we're going to say you can't do what you're currently trying to do, and what we want to have happen, what we want to have happen is that it remains either essentially parkland or land that is consistent with being part of the floodplain and right next to the river and all that, we need to be willing to buy it. Now, whether we buy it for the $1 million that it's currently assessed at,
Or Wendell using a little bit of leverage. The public outcry is leverage to get a premium on that
Well.
property. If I was Wendell Wood and the dude's in the catbird seat and he's a crafty guy and he knows how to negotiate a deal, I would leverage public outcry to get a premium on this land from taxpayers.
well,
Would you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ultimately, our answer is, if we decide we want to go that way, and I'm not.
And he watches the show. His son does.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm not committing anything on this, but if the city says we want it and we're willing to pay a fair price for it, then we can go into the eminent domain process and let the court decide what the fair value is. And right now, my understanding is that the law is that their rights. The value would get calculated based upon the rights that they have, the vested rights that they have.
Which would be the by right use.
Well, at this point, they don't have an approved site plan. So they don't have a vested right at this point. But that's a legal argument that is frankly beyond my pay grade. I'm glad that we're hiring a new city attorney who knows a whole lot more about
That
this
sounds
stuff than I
extremely
do.
complicated.
Now, how many times do you get that as a lawyer? Hey, what do you think about this? I do want to make a
It's
correction.
like being a doctor at a cocktail party.
And Mr.
Hey, Doc,
Fenwick-
what about this thing on my arm?
Mr. Fenwick deserves an opportunity to speak on this because this is a key issue.
He does,
let
but
me-
I need you to put a pin. Just think about
Okay.
this because I need to make a correction.
Yeah.
I misquoted the numbers on the houses. What I was looking at was what's sold, right? So the information I just wanted to make sure to get the record straight. What's active, is 0. So there's actually 0 homes. But go ahead, Bob. I just wanted to set
Well,
the
let
record
me,
straight.
if I can get my
So somebody
note
will
here.
check it for sure.
What people aren't talking about as well is it's not just the value of the land, there's an economic opportunity there. If you have property on a river, and they would certainly,
Oh, they would rent in
they
a
would go
heartbeat.
for that,
They would
yeah.
rent in a heartbeat.
yeah, so it's not just the land, it's the economic opportunity.
The tax upside, you're
Yeah.
saying. Are you saying tax upside for the city
Well,
and
no,
the
the income.
economic
No, the
ecosystem
income,
that is improved on High Street?
The income for the developer. I mean, that's
Well, it's
what they're in
passive
business
income,
for.
It's direct income, it's all kinds of different.
Yeah, all kinds of
And you also
things.
have the issue, we started the program with perception and reality. We also have the issue that the city is kiboshing housing from a perception standpoint. That's the perception that people will have here.
So,
Or they would say the city is protecting the floodplain from a developer who wants to put 200 units in the floodplain.
That's called branding and advertising, and that's my specialty right there, and that's going to be difficult to sell.
Or the city is dealing with what we have. We have 10.2 square miles of land. We will never get more than that unless we buy a school outside somewhere.
so that's why I push back a little bit with you, Bob, on the cyclical thing. You and I have been in the business for a long time. Everybody who watched the show knows.
And Ray Cadell's Bob's agent. He wants you to know that. Ray Cadell put it in the feed. He
Yeah.
said, by the way, Keith, Mr. Fenwick has not one, but 2 pretty good real estate agents.
yeah.
Julie, is it G?
Julie G.
Julie G and myself.
Yeah.
We have his current home listed, and we'll be sure he lands in the city in a house that he wants.
So
Ray Cadell.
I love. I got to tell you,
Ray Cadell's protecting
You
his
could-
client over here.
you could not have picked a better person.
Well, hey, I knew that, Keith.
You could not have
both
picked
of
a better
those.
person.
He's also giving
top-notch
props
realtors.
to Mayor Snook. He says Bob Fenwick and Mayor Snook are 2 clear-thinking public servants, whatever their politics are.
Well,
Well, I think our politics actually are pretty close. We just might have a little difference.
Well, so, one of the great things about this conversation is we may be landing on different sides of a specific issue, but we're actually having a conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, let me-
We're not showing up to have a conversation, right? We're actually having a conversation.
All right, let
So
me
that's
jump
good.
in.
Sure,
One
go
quick
ahead.
note about the property that they're next to the river down there. And it's going to hit on what I said, I think, in the intro here. There's a young lady who is sort of ramrodding the effort of the citizens to get input. She, as of a month ago, she had tried to talk to NDS, Neighborhood Development Service, for 1 year to get a phone call returned. They wouldn't even return her phone call. So that's the kind of thing, and I hear this kind of business, that was sort of a way more than most people, but that's what I was talking about. And if you have the citizens involved, you don't have this angst and this anxiety that we feel in our city now.
I couldn't agree with you more, Bob. I've been waiting.
Mayor Snook has said, though, we've given the citizens ample opportunity to get involved. This has been going on for a long time in a very public fashion. And to Mayor Snook's point, if folks are late to the party with involvement and they miss the opportunity to get involved, who is that on?
Well, and let's be clear, I think I'm
That's
not
more
sure that
customer
Bob was
service.
talking about the upzoning issue, which is what our conversation.
I think you're talking about community involvement just in totality.
Just customer service.
Well, like I said, everything's tied together. So
You're talking about customer service, right? The direct
absolutely,
contact
yeah.
between
Like a
the-
manager would come in and say, if a phone call comes in, I'm going to make sure you return it within 1 day.
Yeah, I can tell you, again, this is more of a land trust stuff, but our project that we did on Nassau Street, I'm still trying to get my bond money back after 3 years. So but I will say, in fairness to the city, under the current leadership, it's 1,000% better than it was a couple of years
No
ago.
Well,
doubt.
look,
Yeah.
nobody expects us to be perfect, but we can
Yeah.
be better.
It's
That's-
customer service.
Yeah.
Dude,
I get it.
and you got to give props to Mayor Snook. You got to give props to Michael Payne, Juan Diego Wade, Brian Pinkston, Leah Puryear. Got to give props to Cena McGill. I think he used the term stabilize the organization.
Without
Mayor
doubt.
Snook did, and they have done that. They have stabilized the organization. So you got to give props to these folks here. It's completely different than what it used to be.
So thank you, Mayor. So, Bob,
As I always say, I take 1/5 of the credit.
well, it takes leadership, so thank you. So Bob, right, cops, firemen, teachers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I heard the same thing from a well, I won't give the person's sex, but a firefighter. Couldn't find anything in town.
So how do we help
It's
that?
called Drive Till You Qualify. That's why people go to Fluvanna.
You know what the crazy thing is? That term right there,
Has been
drive to
expanded.
qualify, legitimately was coined on this side.
Yeah, sure. And we
Housing
coined it-
affordability.
Housing affordability. We coined a new one. You fly to you qualify now.
Well, yeah.
You know, folks are now going to Harrisonburg and all that stuff to work
Absolutely.
to work here. So Bob, what's the solution? What is your solution to go ahead and
Well, let me jump real
Yeah,
quick
sure.
because we don't have to reach perfection right away.
Well, we
no,
all
no
believe
matter
in-
what we come up with, and I hope the citizens are involved in a meaningful way, because it's not just carpenters and we have consultants that live in the city who try to make their opinion felt, and they don't feel like anything is happening. So go ahead, say that question again because I just had to get that out.
Yeah, sure. I think the question.
How do you get middle income and lower income
okay.
people to live in the Charlottesville city limits?
All right.
That's
Well,
what you're asking.
let me start this way.
Yes, sir.
First of all, you take care of the easy stuff, and it's
So
maintenance.
what is the easy stuff?
Well, let me give you an example in some of the projects. They have people dedicated to maintenance, and when I was on council, I would drive by, and you could see doors are open, screens are torn. It was obviously abandoned, and I'd ask them, why aren't these things being maintained? Why don't turn this unit over and get another family in there? Turned out that they had. Say they had on the books 25 jobs that they should fill, and they only had 15 jobs filled at minimum wage. And back then, we were still fighting for a minimum wage that mirrored the federal minimum wage. So whatever we come to,
But that doesn't even come close.
no. But my point is, always start there
Yeah.
while we're doing this other stuff. Because in that case that I'm talking about, that would have been probably 30 to 45 units. So all of this stuff, and it's still going to be a situation with 10.2 square miles that we can only pack so much stuff in here before we really affect the quality of life and the reason why people want to move here.
So another thing we've coined on the show is turning red tape into green tape. 95% of any new construction unit is red tape. So there's a place to help, right? There's a place there to kind of reduce this red tape and this particular cost to go ahead and move it forward. As the recovering developer in the room, generally what any developer is really looking for is give me a good playbook. Give me the rules.
And don't change them.
And don't change them.
Yeah.
And I think
That's what any businessman wants.
and I think the zoning rewrite, look, perfect, don't let perfect get in the way of good, right? It's going in the right direction, in my opinion, personal opinion, on that end of it. But it'll get reworked as time goes on because you're going to learn lessons that's going to go ahead and change it. But it's a good book. It's a good roadmap. It's a good set of blueprints, right? That's what you work from. It's a good blueprint to move forward. My personal opinion, and this may make some folks unhappy. I agree with Lloyd, and I've said it publicly on the show. This isn't going to produce a lot. You're not going to see multi-story.
I think this is going to end up backfiring. It's going to make the land so opportunistic in theory that it's driving up the cost of the dirt because of the potential, and it's not even going to yield the density we're talking.
It's not. But Bob, you know what I found out, because I'm part of a team out in Portland and Seattle? When they adopted, you know what they figured out? They figured out the building code didn't let them do what they wanted to do, right? And so they went through this whole process, adopted everything to Lloyd's point. Like we'll take a single-family detached turning into a duplex, but guess what happens now, right? You're a builder. You got to now put a 2-hour separation. You got to have multiple exits and so forth and so on. And it turned out that it didn't happen because the cost of converting these to meet the building code. So one of the things I hope happens here is the planning department talks to your building department and say, hey, the things we're trying to do, can you actually do it? I'm not talking about parking. I'm talking about taking your home that's on the market and carving it up into 4 units or whatever number of units. And you'll find out the cost to do that is super expensive, and it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, well, the one thing, and I know you're itching to get in here, Lloyd, but once you codify something, once it becomes law, it's hard to take it back. That's another issue I have with the zoning proposal. Because once you codify something, people will start investing money based on that law.
Sure.
And if you go into court, the judge is going to look at the equities.
Sure.
I'll just leave it at that. So.
That's 100% correct.
And to touch on this question of the fact that it's not going to make a huge difference right away, one of the things that the consultants had suggested to us is that we come up with a system where we have a lot of different dials we could turn
Sure.
that might increase the capacity, that might increase the rate at which this change would occur. And the idea was you don't have to turn them all up to 10 right at the beginning. Maybe you turn them up a little bit to 3 or 4 and see how that works, and then maybe you want to turn some other. The idea being that, for one thing, change of property rights generally only works in one direction. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to scale back something that you have once given. And the reason for that is not purely constitutional taking issues and things like that, but the reality is if you enable a particularly ugly use, a particularly offensive use in a residential neighborhood and it gets built, then other people on the street are going to say, oh, I can do that too, I want to do that too, or more accurately, some people will say, yuck, I want out of here, I'm going to sell, and then they sell to somebody who wants that uglier use. And so what we see in effect is that this kind of thing works like a ratchet. Mm-hmm. It only goes up, and you're not going to be able to ratchet it back. So what I've suggested to people is let's take a more limited approach, try it for 5 years, mm-hmm. see what we think. If it works, if it's doing good things, maybe we leave it alone. If it's not doing enough good things, maybe we turn something else up to from 4 to 6 or something like that. But the whole idea, I think, one of the things we have to keep in mind as we look at all of the different restrictions and different things that the consultants have recommended changing. And I will say that virtually all of them came from various members of the Planning Commission. They didn't come just spring full-blown out of the minds of the consultants. But a number of the planning commissioners came up with some of these things. We have to look at what's on what I will term the critical path. What is it that actually is going to limit or drive the number of units that can be built on a particular lot? And it turns out under the current formulation, although we've got all kinds of things about 2,500 square foot sublots, I'm not getting into the technicalities, it turns out that what really it seems to be the limiting factor is the provision that would require a road frontage of at least 40 feet. And so you're not going to be able to take one of these lots and divide it into 4 different pieces because you don't have 160 feet worth of road frontage. And so when you actually look at all of the things that are going to be limiting factors and you recognize that the things that people are getting most upset about aren't actually going to be relevant to the decision, I think we as drafters of the policy ought to find a way to limit the fights that we're going to have to those things that matter, and to not put into the equation a whole bunch of fights that aren't going to matter.
So I'm a big believer in plagiarism and stealing things, so I'm going to steal your ratchet analogy because that's far better, because that's what I was thinking. But the question is, who controls those 2 ratchets? What entity controls those ratchets going up, right? Because we know
City Council.
City Council. So the City Council ultimately...
The way that I would be looking at it is that, excuse me, that we would have these variables that we could change, but they would have to be changed at the council level by tweaking the statute, by tweaking the ordinance.
So I think that's important to Bob's point about the public and folks feeling like they're being engaged. And I asked that question for a reason, because some of the stuff I hear is the bureaucrats are going to have their hands on that ratchet. So clearly the ratcheting up, or 1 notch at a time, if this is working, is going to be controlled by whoever's elected.
It's going to be governed by ordinance, which is going to be governed by the council.
That's why elections matter. Neil Williamson, that's from you, sir.
Let me throw in there just something a little more general. It's the consent of the governed, because it's not just us discussing this, although this is a terrific discussion that's going on here, we have certain guidelines, federal, state,
Sure.
and of course the city. So, e pluribus unum, from many come one. We the people, I've preached that kind of stuff for many, many years. And the citizens of Charlottesville, for different reasons, believe that. It's in our DNA.
Sure.
So, look, I give
It's
you
kind
all,
of the birthplace
I
of
give
it,
you
isn't
all
it?
props, yeah, for what we're doing here, because Lloyd and I are not that much different. If the senior staff would sit down with some of these citizen organizations, I think it would be valuable for everybody.
Well, that requires leadership from the top down. So that comes from the council down to the city manager and so forth and so on.
You got an engineer making a point that may help with the negotiation with Wendell Wood. In similar vein, this is from Carly Wagner. She's background in real estate and an engineer. In a similar vein, the planning department should talk to FEMA and the building department about cost and feasibility of building and insuring in the floodplain.
Yeah.
To call the bluff, or for nothing else, have accurate information for land negotiations if they end up pursuing the purchase of land.
Well, let me mention an interesting little aspect of the floodplain analysis, that the engineer behind this project is Justin Schimpf. The current floodplain lines were revised just a few years ago on a submission by Justin Schimpf.
Of course, he's a smart guy.
And nothing wrong with that,
Yeah.
nothing illegal
He knows
about
how to
it.
play the game.
But the reality is that, and the same thing came up a couple of years ago on Nassau Street, but in this particular case, I mean, people remember seeing the floods
Sure.
on the circus grounds. That is not ancient history. That's actual memory. And the argument is he's going to put a 15-foot retaining wall in there to keep the flooding away from his property. What that means effectively, of course, is that you're channelizing the water, you're making it rush faster and more erosively on other people's property. And that's one of the reasons why we're not supposed to be approving building in the floodplain, even though we think we might be able to protect what we are personally building. So this issue of where the floodplain line ought to go is something that there's currently some hydrological study going on along those lines. I don't know if it's going to come out anytime soon, but we were told last year that there was a study that was being done and may enable us to know whether this particular set of floodplain lines is truly accurate.
Well, that's a super smart move. I know a little bit about this. This is my world. Some of these floodplain lines were set up, long time ago before GIS was happened, and so if this a good investment, in my opinion, of money from the city is to go through and actually figure out where it is, from a surveying perspective and create an actual plan. That's generally sometimes what happens with these floodplains, and Carly will probably either agree with me, I would assume. Sometimes they're old. In this particular case, they're not, right? But in some cases, the map is showing the floodplain, but you go out and shoot the grades, and the map and GIS is off by a tremendous amount. So a lot of floodplains get changed that way because reality happens. Oops, the old one was off. But in this case, I've been here long enough to know to see that thing flood a bunch of times.
I got a lot of stuff.
And we're at 11:34.
Mayor Snook, some insight into the city manager search. If you could offer any perspective, I feel like we're in the bottom of the ninth inning here. And then also I have to ask respectfully, the clandestine nature of this search has contrasted with previous searches. I respect that you're interviewing candidates that are active in other positions and they fear they may lose their job if they are on a short list for a city manager hire in Charlottesville. But at the same time, as a taxpayer in the city myself, I was hoping for a little bit of communication from government on who the next CEO of Charlottesville, Virginia was going to be.
Well, okay, so the status of things, I wouldn't say we're in the bottom of the ninth, but maybe we're in the top of the ninth. It's getting close.
Okay.
We interviewed a number of candidates, all excellent. As I've said, a good mix of black, white, male, female. We've got some discussions we've still got to have among ourselves. As far as the question of what kind of public engagement we can offer, the basic problem that we had was that if we were going to hire somebody from outside of Charlottesville, they didn't want to be outed.
Yeah.
And so if we go to a completely open process, we end up either with candidates from outside of Charlottesville who are less than the top drawer, or we end up with only internal candidates, neither one of which I think is a good approach. So the consultant, the hiring consultant we were using, we actually have access to a couple different folks like this, said, okay, we have done a very thorough vetting of these folks. We've done all the Google searches, we've done all the newspaper searches, everything else, which, by the way, had not been done when Dr. Richardson was hired, and that was not done with an external consultant, for what it's worth. And so we've got a lot of that work having been done. And the question, if we end up with an external candidate as our top choice, would we have some sort of a process before formally voting on that person? Probably yes, but I don't know. I really don't want to get into a situation where we sacrifice the best candidate on the altar of, giving everybody a chance to take their pound of flesh out first.
That's a fair response. I totally appreciate that response, and ideally, if I had to weigh the scales of justice, of transparency, or having the most qualified best candidate be the CEO of the city, I would want the most qualified best candidate.
Amen.
So I respect your process. I also appreciate what the citizens have said of being someone in the dark, and it sounds like you appreciate that as well,
Yep.
especially since previous searches were so transparent. Any thoughts that you'd like to offer on this? This is an important one here. This is pretty much the person running the city.
Yeah, this is not to second guess the process. This is just ordinary citizen talking. I couldn't help but kind of get the feeling that this is like a draft situation. You do your homework, you have people advising you, and you're deciding on different merits, and then you take your best shot. Whether that turns out for the team, you won't know for a couple years. So what I just offered was I would not hurry this. I would not apply any pressure that I had to come to a quick decision on this. This is pretty important. Somebody said we've had 4 or 5 city managers, and I don't know if that figure is correct.
Oh, no. That it depends on the window.
Yeah.
If we're talking from like Mike Murphy till now, it's been a carousel of city managers. That's safe to say. A carousel of city
even before Mike.
Well, we had institutional memory before Mike. We had Mr. Jones.
Maurice Jones.
Went to Chapel Hill.
No, I'm just saying as far as people responding to the new leader, that kind of a deal.
Since Maurice Jones, it's been a carousel of city managers.
But that's not unusual in public bodies.
This prolific
was
nature is unusual.
Very much so, and it kind of went down to where things were functioning at that.
Oh, absolutely.
At that particular time.
And you're choosing your words carefully.
I'm choosing my words very carefully on that end of it. You want to add a little bit to that, to the conversation?
Well, we had, if we go back to the beginning of 2018, we had Maurice Jones, Mike Murphy, Teron Richardson, John Blair
watching the show
for 3 months.
Chip Boyles.
We had about 3 months where we didn't have anybody.
Well, you had Sam Sanders.
Sam Sanders was sort of the senior deputy,
right?
So you have
but
to
he was
count
still
that.
a deputy. He wasn't really even an acting city manager. Then we had
Robert Bob Group.
well, no.
Oh yeah, the guy that quit before he took the job.
Right.
Yeah,
Mark
that's right.
Foley.
Yeah.
And then we get to the Robert Bob Group, and we interviewed 3 of their recommended candidates, and we picked Michael Rogers. So that's at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, perhaps.
7.5.
And then a couple of halves somewhere.
Yeah, in the last 4 or 5 years, and since we wound up in January bringing Michael Rogers in, he has brought a great deal of stability.
He's been great.
He's He's a seasoned
Yeah,
pro.
right.
So
Can he be the guy? Is Michael Rogers the guy? Are we going to hire Michael Rogers?
I will tell you that he is one of the finalists we've been talking to.
If just a taxpayer's opinion here, I pay a lot of taxes on this building. Okay, we're talking $10,000 plus here. That's a lot of money.
Hey, I'm 2 blocks away. I know what you're talking
okay.
about.
I feel the sting. Okay, and that's a lot of money. We may have real estate wealth, but it's not necessarily. You get it.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So Michael Rogers seems like the right answer. He's already got a tryout. The tryout's going damn good. People like him, and he's willing to stay in the background, out of the limelight, and just run the city.
Well,
and I will say, one of the things we've done is over the course of the last year or so, a few things have happened. One is when we hired the police chief, the same group, Polyhire, did a sort of a community survey about community needs and perceptions and so on. We also had, as part of the strategic plan process that we started, we had some focus groups and this kind of thing, and as well as getting some opinions from members of the city staff. And there were a couple of things that people said, whether they were citizens or whether they were people working in City Hall or just what, stability was the number one
no doubt.
thing. Stability, and let people in government do their jobs. And people would sometimes talk about, yes, it's fine to be progressive, but we want a government that works. And it is no coincidence that the one TV ad I cut during this season,
It was a good commercial.
I talk about, this is progressive government that works. That's what people want, that's what people expect, and that's what we've tried to give them in the last few years.
I think you've done it. I just want a government that works, where our elected officials are in the background and they don't realize that it's about themselves, but it's instead about doing what's good for taxpayers and small business owners like me that have a 6-month-old and a 5-year-old and a stay-at-home wife. That is the bedrock of our family. And we just want to keep the lights on, Bob. I just want to keep the lights on and feed my kids. That's all I want to do.
So why this conversation about city manager is so important? What kind of government do we have? We have
Council manager
We have a managed government. We don't have a strong mayor.
So weak
Right,
mayor,
government.
yeah.
We don't have a strong mayor. So
Or a
that's
strong council either. for
Very
that
different
matter.
than Richmond, for example, for those that don't
Right.
need an
Yeah,
example.
that's
With
ex-
Mr. Mayor Stoney.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, the influence on the city council is to hire the right person. This is probably one of the most important things.
The most important decision
Yeah.
we make.
It is the most important decision.
I mean, I don't want to
I would say-
speculate here.
I would say budget.
I'm reading
is
between
up
the
there.
lines here. Mayor Snook's already broke some news that Tito Durrett is retiring at the end of this month. That's breaking news there. The second piece of breaking news is that Michael Rogers is on the short list of candidates for city manager. And I know this man fairly well. He's transparent and straightforward, Mayor Snook. It sounds like Michael Rogers is very seriously being considered for this position.
So Bob,
No comment.
one of the secret sources of what we do here, Jerry and I, three times a week, is this long format. This is what we do.
Can't get taken out of context.
Well, look, this is a whole lot better than a forum where I have maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes to talk about these things.
This is
so.
why I invited you to have an opportunity. Invited everybody to sit down and do this. The invitation stays open if you should be successful and get on. We do on Fridays what we call coffee with and whatever. But this is what this is. This is a long format conversation. Poor Jerry's fingers get worked to the
I
bone
can't even get to all the comments here.
because
So
all
who-
the comments come in and do.
So who serves the coffee? Why did it leave
I mean,
me?
look at the.
Well, let's
check my-
Chopped liver
hey,
here.
Hey, Bob. Hey, Bob. Hey, Bob. Bob. When you show up at 10 o'clock, you get the coffee.
Oh, okay.
Just saying.
All
Oh, that
right.
was
Okay.
funny.
Sorry, couldn't pass the dig.
Bob was working. He was working.
Da-ding.
Okay, all right, so we got to close here. It's
Yeah, 'cause
11:45.
11:30 is
And
our
I got
cutoff
another
time.
show coming up at 12:30, and this man's going to have to scramble, but these guys should get final words on anywhere they want to go. I sincerely mean this. I think this gentleman, candidate Fenwick, has a very real chance of being elected here, and I sincerely mean this. We are going to have a temperature of Charlottesville and how it has changed
Wednesday
from
morning.
a progressive standpoint or has not changed from a progressive standpoint with you. And whether or not you get on the dais. I'm sure you have already thought
I
about
can't
this.
wait
I
for
can tell you have.
Wednesday's show. Because
Dude, it's
we're
going to be
gonna-
awesome.
We're going to
I'm
know.
junkie for this stuff. I live for this. I love this stuff. I know everybody here loves. I just love the local news stuff here. Show is yours.
Wrap up, Bob.
Okay, well, look, I appreciate what you all do, and I appreciate the kind words. What I offer to the community is 55 plus years in business. I have negotiated, I've written contracts, sometimes to my regret.
But you stuck with them, though, right?
And I stuck with them, and that's part of the deal. Lived here, I know the city. I know when we had a Korean War jet fighter plane in McIntyre Park. I remember the Blue Laws, so I go back a long ways. It's a beautiful city. We have people here who are very, very talented. And one of my biggest things would be citizen participation. Whether it's coming on this show or going to neighborhood associations, I made it a practice of going to different churches just so I could see the people and see how the differences between the communities was. It is not that big. It's common sense. If I'm successful, I get a little button up on the dais, and it's yes, no, or abstain. It's usually almost yes or no. So this is really not rocket science. I have a lot of people to call on to ask questions of and to see what the citizens being governed is all about. So thanks for having me here. This is quite a setup. Thanks to Lloyd. I think this back and forth has been civil. That's the way it should be.
Always.
It's like buying a car. You're not going to, neither side is going to be happy, but when you get up from the table, you shouldn't be cussing
You
at each
apparently
other.
never seen him negotiate.
It's not true. It's not true. The best negotiations are when everyone leaves the table feeling a little sting.
A little unhappy.
Because that means it's fair.
Well,
those are the best
That
ones.
means everybody
Real quick,
won.
last time I was on with this guy, I could get a word in edgewise. So he settled down quite a bit.
Oh, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. You are always welcome here, and the environment will always be one that follows the golden rule of respect. We don't have to agree, but we just have to have a conversation with respect. I think we did that. Mayor Snook, the show is yours.
I just want to talk a little bit about what has been different on City Council for the last couple of years. That one of the things that I tried to make sure we did when I became mayor was that I talked to everybody on council before every meeting, that I knew before we went into the meeting what the issues were going to be that we were going to be fighting about. In many cases, we had worked things out ahead of time. In many cases, I had been able to figure out, well, I'll give you an example. Say there's a 15-page collective bargaining ordinance, but we knew there were maybe 15 things we wanted to talk about and 15 things that the union people wanted to talk about. And I went through council and I said, okay, we've got agreement on this. We don't have to fight about this one. Let's get down to the 3 things that we're really fighting about. And by talking to one another, and more importantly, by listening to one another, we occasionally actually changed each other's minds so that we didn't have to have these long 2 a.m. kinds of meetings at City Council. And that didn't mean that we weren't having disagreements. It meant that we were solving them. We were resolving them in a good manner by listening to one another ahead of time. And so, a couple months ago, the Seville tomorrow, I can never remember the names these days, had their movers and shakers issue, and they had me
Seville
up there.
Weekly.
Seville Weekly, and they said, Lloyd Snook, 4 words, shorter city council meetings.
I love it.
And that's not to say we weren't discussing the issues. It is to say we were coming to decisions about issues in an orderly fashion. And that's an important part of what needs to happen, that when you talk to one another, that there are no surprises, that you talk to one another and you know what's going to happen, or at least you know where the issues are. People may change their minds, but at least they're respectful about it. And so that's an important thing that we've tried to do in the last couple of years. It's an important thing that I hope we will continue in the next 4 years.
So
That was beautiful. Well said.
I have said this more than once, and you said it earlier in the show. To do the job correctly, it's a minimum of 40 hours a week. So
Is that true? Is that how much you guys are grinding?
I wouldn't say it's a minimum. To be mayor, probably 40. To be a counselor, certainly 20.
You're
Oh my God,
you're clocking 40 a week? Easily?
Probably.
If you
Wow.
kept track
In
of
part
it.
because I respond to so many emails.
I know you
When
do.
people say, nobody ever responds to me, well, try emailing me, because I can't tell you how many hundreds of emails I
Oh.
respond to in a week.
Wow, that's impressive.
Well, there's committees that you're on, because I know, because
Yeah.
I've seen you in a couple of
Yeah.
ones that I'm sitting at. So it takes a lot of work to go ahead and do this. So my hat's off the fact that you guys are trying to get back into the spot again. I understand better than most how much work it takes and family commitment. So thank you for coming on. Long format, anytime, Bob, you're welcome up. Lloyd, you're always welcome. Just wander down the hall and walk in. But thank you, gentlemen, for taking
Watch
your
out
time
for
out of
the
your day.
puddles.
Watch out for the puddles.
So
That's an inside joke.
We got a leak in the building here.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, the I Love Steville show, guys, is up in 40 minutes. We have Supervisor Jesse Rutherford of Nelson County in the studio, and we're going to talk everything government here in Central Virginia. Can you tell it's election season, and can you tell I'm excited? Thank you kindly for joining us. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Bob, you did a hell of a job. Yeah, thank you. Seriously.